Okay, we are up and running and live.
Great, thank you and good evening. My name is John Henning, Mayor of the City of Morro Bay. I want to welcome you to tonight's informational session or community forum titled Facts About the Stacks. Appreciate you all taking the time in our community to be here. And I'm happy to be representing the City Council this evening. I wanted to just call it to your attention that this is not a formal City Council meeting. Instead, this is a meeting to provide information to the community about the stacks, and there will be various presenters that will make comments a little bit later. Several years ago, the City Council organized a quote-unquote, at that time, a Dynegy subcommittee, which is now known as the Vistra subcommittee. And Councilmember Dawn Addis is with us this evening and will make comments at the closing. She is my partner in the Vistra subcommittee, so I appreciate Dawn being here tonight and sharing her perspective as well a little bit later. In addition to that, Councilmember Jeff Heller is watching this evening, and Councilmember Laurel Barton are also watching. Again, this not being a formal City Council meeting, we will not as council members be making comments other than my opening remarks and Councilmember Addis's remarks that were already made previously in council meetings as public record. And so I just wanted to note that so that folks were aware of the fact that this again is in compliance with California's Brown Act. In addition, I believe joining us this evening will be Megan Harmon. She is our new Coastal Commissioner and representative for our region, and I just wanted to make note of that this evening. So welcome everybody. And Don, if we could go ahead and start with the first slide. Second slide, perhaps. So on June the 9th of 2021, the City Council in an open meeting approved a memorandum of understanding with Vistra and between Vistra and the City of Morro Bay. Essentially, the bottom line of the memorandum of understanding was to, number one, allow the city to gain easements that we were seeking to complete our water reclamation facility. Through those negotiations, the city was able to obtain really fairly highly valued pieces of property for $1 from Vistra. And have access to the sites that we needed for our WRF project. In addition to that, the second premise of the MOU was to basically eliminate the obstacles that were in the way, prohibiting or inhibiting reuse of the Morro Bay power plant parcel. One of the most significant was the fact that there was a $1 buyout option that the city had that could be exercised in 2034, which really prohibited any developer from coming in and potentially losing any development opportunities to the city at that time. And so that indeed was part of the MOU and part and parcel of the understanding between the city and Vistra. The third was to create the opportunity as a city to be a leader potentially in battery storage and benefits. And again, this evening is not about the proposed battery storage project in Morro Bay. This evening's program is about the stacks and consideration of information regarding the stacks. But it does pave the way, so to speak, for potentially approving such a battery storage project in the future in Morro Bay. The fourth premise of the MOU was to provide a pathway to remove the existing structures at the power plant, including the building, the main building structure, as well as the stacks. And the fifth thing was it offered multiple opportunities for public input and discussion in the planning process through the agreement between Vistra and the city to enter into a development agreement that will be begun probably in several months, and we'll have many opportunities for the city to weigh in with that. This memorandum of understanding, as I said, was approved on June 9th of 2021. And it basically includes two important points that I want to call out for this evening. One, that Vistra is responsible for the demolition of the turbine building, as well as the stacks. And it is Vistra's desire to demo or demolish both the building and the stacks. However, because of community input, the City Council discussed the need to talk with the community and potentially entertain discussions with regard to maintaining the stacks. And the city has, as part of the MOU, an option to request by December 31st of 2022 that the stacks remain, but that must be communicated to Vistra by, again, December 21st, 2022, and that the stacks, again, would remain no later than December 31st of 2027. If not completed by December 31st, 2027, Vistra would, as a penalty, have to pay the city $3 million for not following through on the demolition of the stacks. The main reason we're presenting this evening is to get your information and input regarding some issues. And some of the tenets that the City Council laid down that we thought were very important to consider as we looked at our relationship with Vistra, the potential demolition of the properties mentioned and the development of the plant site were, as noted on the screen, number one, obviously community safety, to make sure that the community remains safe no matter what we do or what we enter into with regard to agreements with Vistra, that community of quality of life is maintained, that there is continuous support for vibrant and diverse local economy, that the whatever happens with regard to development, that there's a contribution to the city's financial sustainability, that there's also a contribution to the environmental sustainability of the city and the surrounding area, and that there will be an overall balance of benefits and impacts, including certain trade-offs that will be discussed later. And also important to the City Council was consideration of the local Native American heritage and paying respect to the cultural resources that exist on the existing site. And lastly, that as an example of this evening, that we engage the public into meaningful dialogue, providing information so that we can obtain significant input for the city. So again, thank you for being here this evening. And with that, I will turn it over to our esteemed city manager, Mr. Scott Collins. Scott?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for all tuning in this evening, and for those who watch later on, as this will be posted to our website. The key objectives for this community forum, it really is to provide the timely information and opportunities for the public to gain insight from which to, use that information to develop informed points of view about the future of the stacks. We know there's been a lot of discussion really since the last 20 years about the future of this site, ever since the previous owners were talking about repowering the plant. And then when we got into the position where we knew the plant was going to be decommissioned, there's been a lot of discussion about what should happen with the plant, and in particular the stacks, since they definitely raise some issues around the iconicness of them and some of the nostalgia around that and other important points of view. So we really wanted to provide an opportunity for the public to learn from the experts. And so the main mission tonight is to do that and also provide opportunities for input, both from the comments and questions we've received, probably about 30 or 40 emails in the last couple of weeks, as well as opportunities for engagement during this public forum tonight. Next slide, Dawn. So the agenda for tonight, you heard from Mayor Heading, who is part of the Vistra subcommittee with Councilmember Don Addis. So once we move on from that, we'll talk about the origin, uses, and current conditions of the stacks, and we have several presenters for that. and then move on to considerations for the future of the stacks with some of the same presenters, and then provide opportunity for additional questions and answers, and then discussion of next steps with Councilmember Don Addis. Next slide. So we have several key presenters tonight. I'll name these, not all their titles, but give you an idea of who's presenting. We have Vistra Corporation, Claudia Morro, who's the Senior Vice President, Dinah Tickner, who's a Director of Decommissioning and Demolition and has oversight of the Morro Bay Power Plant site. We have three folks from the San Luis Obispo County Air Pollution Control District, Gary Wiley, Executive Director, Dora Drexler, Engineering Compliance Manager, and Tim Hughes, the Compliance Supervisor. We have the California Department of Toxic Substance Control, or DTSC for short, John Bystra, Program Manager, and Carrie Rasmussen, Public Participation and Community Relations. Last, but not presenting tonight, we have California Coastal Commission participating via comments from Kevin Kahn, who's the District Supervisor for the Central Coast District. Next slide, please. And it is my honor to introduce Don Maruska, who you can see up here in the presenters panel. Don has had an office in the city of Morro Bay for 28 years as a master certified coach. He specializes in helping people solve tough issues together. He's coached over 10,000 local government professionals across the United States. With an MBA and a law degree from Stanford and decades of business experience, Don has helped many cities, including Morro Bay, on several issues, engage the public in dialogue and discussion on very, very important issues like the one we're talking about tonight, as well as things like our water reclamation facility, which the mayor referenced earlier. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Don to talk about the multiple ways that you can engage today. Thank you, Don.
Thank you very much, Scott. And thank you, members of the public. I'm pleased to see we have 183 members of the public attending thus far. We may even have more through the evening. So glad that each and every one of you is here. We encourage you to participate in multiple ways, to listen and learn. A lot of information has been prepared for this evening so that you can benefit from that. To ask questions, I ask that you do that. You send the questions to me. That gives me an opportunity to organize them. You know, with 183 people, we couldn't have each of you ask the questions individually, but if you ask your questions, we can put similar topics together, get your topics covered in an organized way, and I think you'll find that far more satisfying for you. You can offer digital comments through the chat if you wish. You can offer public comments verbally at the end of the session via the raise hand function, or via a telephone using the 9 as the raise hand feature. I'll get to that at the end. I suggest that you hold off on raising your hand to see if your question or topic that you have in mind is already getting covered in the course of what's been prepared for this evening. We had over 3 dozen questions come in and have organized the questions and responses accordingly. So there'll be lots of opportunities for additional comments and to advocate directly to the council as the council takes this matter before itself. But we wanted to get the facts and figures to you this evening and to have that be successful. So one of the key sources of information about the stacks is, of course, the owner of the stacks, Vistra Corporation. So I thought it would be important for you in terms of understanding where that information is coming from to have a few facts about Vistra. So I asked them on your behalf to take about 2 minutes to share some information, some facts about Vistra, and to do that is Claudia Morro, who, as Scott introduced, is the Senior Vice President for Corporate Development and Strategy, the point person, if you will, for Vistra's activities here in Morro Bay. Welcome, Claudia.
Thank you, Don, and thank you, to the city and city council for inviting me to participate tonight. I'm pleased to be here. As Don and Scott said, I'm responsible for development of our renewable and battery storage projects across the Vistra footprint, but wanted to share a little bit more about Vistra so you could get to know us, since we are a part of your community and one of your neighbors in that regard. So Vistra is a large retail electricity and power generation company. We're operating in 20 states across the United States, including California, involved in 6 the 7 competitive wholesale markets in the U.S. We have over 4 million retail customers of all different sizes, from residential customers all the way to large industrial facilities. So we serve all different kinds of people and businesses. On the generation side, we have over 39,000 megawatts of power generation across the United States. To put that in perspective, we're looking and working on the project here in Morro Bay for 600 megawatts. So we have a lot of power plants that we are operating, generating electricity of all different kinds, including natural gas, nuclear, some coal, but more importantly for me, that I'm excited about are solar and battery storage projects across our footprint also. So we'll go to the next slide. I think it's really important, since again we are neighbors and community members, that you have a good feel for what's important to us, what are our principles, what guides our employees across the business, in their activities on a day-to-day basis. And I want to point out, 3 of those 4 principles that I think are really key, in our working here with the community in the city of Morro Bay. So 1, we do business the right way. Integrity and compliance is utmost in our day-to-day decisions and actions. So I think that's of huge importance. 2, we work as a team. We are extremely collaborative, and that's really been the key to our success as a company, and that will be the key to our success and in working together, with the city and with the community here. And then, the last one, we care about our key stakeholders, and that includes our employees, our customers, in the communities where we live and we do business. And Morro Bay is the community a key stakeholder in that regard. So I just want to make that clear. These are the things that are most important to us and how we go about doing business, and want you to get to know us in that regard. So we included 2 other slides on our commitments to environmental stewardship and social stewardship. So I know these will be shared, and encourage you to review and take a look. But just know that key for us is we are committed to contributing and to, in a positive way, to mitigate climate change. And that's one of the that's a key reason why we are here and involved at Morro Bay, is to do that here and to help contribute to California's goals in that regard. And then, as far as social responsibility goes, we are a company that cares, whether it's giving our time or giving our dollars, that is of utmost importance to us too. So that's a little bit about Vistra. I'd like to next introduce Diana Tickner, who works with me here. Diana is the Director of Decommissioning and Demolition. She has, been responsible for those type activities for several years, and quite a few of those have been in our company. So with that, I'll turn it over to Diana.
Thanks, Claudia. And Vistra certainly appreciates the opportunity to provide some information today to address the community's questions about the stacks. So, Dawn, you want to? I guess one of the first questions that we got was, why were the stacks necessary? And basically, the function of the stacks is to vent exhaust flow above the ground level. And so they were constructed contemporaneously with the plant because they were needed. Once the plant shut down, they really weren't needed any longer. For folks that have been around a long time, I think the first stack, which served both units 1 and 2, which were smaller units, so it was a combined stack, were built in the 53 to 55 period. And that's a concrete stack. It's 450 feet tall, and it has a brick liner in it. The second and third stacks, which serve individually units 3 and 4, were constructed in the early 60s to serve those new units, and they became operational in about 1962. While these stacks are also concrete on the outside, they have a steel liner, and that was an advancement in the technology from when the originals were built for units 1 and 2. As I mentioned, all 3 stacks really serve no purpose currently other than stack 3 supports PGE communications equipment for their switchyard at the site and Diablo Canyon. If the stacks are demolished, that equipment will need to be relocated to a location that's selected by PGE. Another question came up was regarding the lighting on the stacks. The lights on the stacks are required by the Federal Aviation Administration, and that includes the number of lights, the type of lights, the color, and the flashing frequency. And that's to protect aircraft from a potential collision with the stacks. I thought it might be helpful for folks to kind of understand a little bit about it. So I found a couple photographs. This is the prior plant manager standing inside the unit 1 and 2 stack. You can notice that the liner there is in brick, and it's also very clean. And just to get an idea of what's holding these stacks up, the picture on the right is the steel rebar that went into the base of the stack prior to the concrete pouring. And so basically, it's about 15 feet thick. Those rebar continue on up the stack as the concrete is placed, and so they run all the way from where they're tied in at the base all the way to the top of the stack. Other questions were on the conditions of the stacks. All 3 of the stacks are currently in good condition. There are no known hazardous material in the stacks. Vistra completes an annual inspection of stack 1-2 for the San Luis Obispo County Air Pollution Control District as Conditional Exemption 113-10. These annual reports are publicly available. The stacks withstood the 2003 San Simeon earthquake that registered 6.5 on the Richter scale and caused a very strong shaking in Morro Bay. We currently have no data on the structural limitations in stronger seismic events, but 6.5 was a fairly large event. Another question that had come through was on what are the life of these stacks? Provided that they're well maintained, they can generally be in excess of 100 years.
Okay, and this would be a good time to stop for a couple of questions. Could you just describe a little bit more about the types of inspections that are done of the stacks, and in particular the structural inspections that you do? What's involved with that? People wanted to know if a structural evaluation has been made of the stacks. Is that part of those inspections that you do?
I think, Don, that one's on the next slide. If you want to flip to that one, if there are any other ones about this one. In accordance with good engineering practice, and Vistra follows the guidelines of the American Society of Civil Engineers that indicate that the interval range for stack inspections is between 2 and 5 years. We've done both Class 1 and Class 2 structural inspections. A Class 1 inspection is an external inspection only, and some of you may have seen these guys. They basically climb up the stack, and then they essentially go down, do an inspection of the internal from the top, and then as they come down the stack, they inspect all the locations of the concrete on the outside. These stacks have 2 ladders, one on each side, so pretty much the entire inspection can be done from the ladders. So they're looking for cracks in anything like that. They're obviously going up. They're looking at the ladders and any kind of connection points of anything to make sure that those are all in working condition and that they're safe. The Class 2 inspection involves the climbers going to the top and then lowering themselves inside and visually inspecting the liners in the stacks. And for the steel liners, they do some ultrasonic testing on the thickness of the stack liners at various intervals along the top to the bottom. Over the last 5 years, maintenance has consisted of stack light replacement, bolt replacements on ladders, some clips on platforms, other minor safety, worker safety types of things, and the costs have ranged from around $5,000 to $30,000. We will be doing our next Class 2 inspection this fall. We're out for bids on that now. And as I mentioned before, that'll include an internal liner inspection and an external inspection. And while we can't necessarily predict the future maintenance costs might be, if the decision is made to retain the stacks long term, it's recommended that in the next 2 to 3 years that caps be placed on each stack to protect the interiors. And the costs for those caps are estimated to be about $75,000 per stack.
Could you explain a little bit more about why that price tag is so high?
Well, the cover has to be manufactured to custom fit the tops of these stacks. There are some pieces of equipment, misting rings and things like that that have to be removed from the tops of the stack in order for these to be placed. It's going to take a crane to lift those up, power generator and a couple other things. So it's not just like putting, plastic or something like that. These are physical barriers that are fitted to the tops of the stacks, made out of metal.
Okay. People are wondering, is the condition and structural integrity of the stacks today compare with when they were first erected? Some people are noting in the chat here that there was some corrosion of exposed steel parts. What is that telling us about the survivability of the stacks with the damp sea air? And let's see, the other part of the question is, does this mean at some point they will become structurally unsound?
Well, provided the inspections are completed at their recommended intervals, and any recommended maintenance is completed, the structural integrity of the stacks should remain good.
Okay. Back to the previous slide, when the discussion about the earthquake in 2003, the council members did receive a communication from Neil Farrell, who is a reporter for the Estero Bay News, who happened to be at the stacks at the time of the earthquake. He relates that it was his observation that the stacks moved as much as 10 feet back and forth at the top. What information do you have and what additional perspectives are there about the integrity of the stacks under seismic conditions? Has that been explored elsewhere, or is this a fairly unique question to this location?
Well, we haven't actually calculated the deflection for these particular stacks, but we did have some data on a similarly designed stack in the not too far distant vicinity from there. And from the data calculations from that stack, it looked like for that event, it would have moved about 2 feet in each direction. So to the visible eye, that would have looked like 4 feet. When the stack's 450 feet up in the air, though, it's a little difficult with the eye when something's moving to actually judge what the distance is.
Okay, great. And I'm noticing a lot of questions streaming in about what would happen with the stacks under one scenario or another. We're going to get to that in a little bit. This section has been really focusing in on the issue of what the status and condition is of the stack, since there are a number of concerns about it. And we're going to turn in a moment now to the APCD, the Air Pollution Control District here for San Luis Obispo County. And thank you, Diana, for the information you provided. We're going to be coming back to you later for some of the cost estimates of taking down the stacks and other information that people would like to have, but want to get the additional perspective here of the regulatory agency that's looking to make sure that the community is safe from any air pollution that might be created now or in the future by the stacks.
Thank you, Don. Tim Fuse, Compliance Supervisor with the San Luis Obispo County Air Pollution Control District, and I'll refer to us as district just because that's a mouthful. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. On behalf of the district, I'd like to thank the city for the opportunity for us to participate in this important discussion. Next slide, please. For those of you who don't know who we are your local county air district. We're one of the 35 districts in the state. Our board is made up of the 5 Board of Supervisors as well as representatives from the 7 cities. Of course, that does include Morro Bay with Dr. Heading as our chair. Basically, our mission is to be responsible for achieving and maintaining healthy air based on scientific health-based standards. Next slide. So I'll jump right into it. Diana mentioned our conditional exemption that we have at the site, and it does require an annual inspection for particulate matter fallout from the openings around the stacks, and that report must be submitted to the district annually. And this is one page of that report that gives a summary of the observations made at the last inspection, which was just completed in June. And as you can see, other than some usual rust and some bird droppings, the area around the stacks are free of any source located fallout or particulate matter from the stacks. So where are we at now? To date, we don't have a notification or a project scope submitted. We do have an asbestos survey that was submitted for preliminary review. We're about in the middle of reviewing that document. At this point, asbestos in the stacks appears very limited to doors and hatch gaskets and a little bit of caulking around the base. Once we do have a project scope and notification received, we will review that report in much more detail. If the stacks are demolished, of course, there will be district oversight with inspections, engineering controls, pursuant to the federal regulation to ensure that compliance is achieved. So the federal regulation is part of the Clean Air Act, actually, and it's part of the National Emission Standards for Hazardous Air Pollutants. It's 40 CFR 61 subpart M. And really boiling it down to it, the EPA has delegated our local air district authority to administer and enforce this regulation, and it's for the protection of the public and the environment. So what does that really mean? It means that the owner or operator of any demolition or renovation needs to thoroughly inspect for the presence of asbestos, and that needs to be done by a certified asbestos consultant. And the district needs to be notified of the demolition and renovation at least 10 working days prior to the beginning of the project. Specifically, there should be a demolition description, which talks about methods used to prevent exposure to the public as well. So additional compliance points, all regulated asbestos material must be removed by a licensed abatement contractor with no visible emissions. That's our standard for the federal regulation. It needs to be adequately wet at all times and sealed in properly labeled bags. And it has to be disposed of, of course, at a licensed asbestos landfill. Additional oversight that we have on the project beside the federal regulation are a few rules. Our Rule 202 is our permit rule, and that covers the conditional exemption at the site currently. Depending upon the project scope and processes involved, we could have additional permits that are required, which would have conditions, of course. Rule 401 is our visible emissions rule, and it has a limit of 20% opacity on any source within the county discharging air contaminants. You might ask, what does 20% mean? Basically, if you're looking at a discharge of a stack and it's pursuant to the method for opacity, if you can see it, it's getting pretty close to 20% or over. And lastly, Rule 402 is nuisance. It requires that no discharge of air contaminants shall cause a public nuisance. And on that, it's not something that just rolls out really quick. Usually, this is something that it's a slow buildup. The source will be notified in writing that we're approaching a public nuisance. Complaints have to be verified by district staff. So it's pretty solid in moving towards a public nuisance. There's usually no doubt in anybody's mind. Next slide.
I think that was the last one that I had from you.
Okay, thank you, Don.
Thank you very much. We're very fortunate here in the community of Morro Bay to have experts like at the Air Pollution Control District that are really very knowledgeable about the Morro Bay power plant. In fact, I recall Gary Wiley was working on the Morro Bay power plant issue when Duke was considering repowering it some 20 plus years ago. So there's a lot of depth of understanding and attention that's been given to these issues. Just one thing I want to come back to on the condition of the stacks here, Diana, before we move on to the next section, is a question people were referring to, the collapse that happened in Miami of the condos and the spalling in the foundation of that building and maybe of the stacks. An issue here. Could you just follow up on that one, please?
Well, while it was a tragic occurrence, we don't really have any details regarding, what actually happened, how it happened, what caused it. So at this point, we don't really have any information to make any kind of comparison.
Okay. And when you speak to a 100-year life, someone's asking, does that mean like in the first stack that by 2052 you'd expect that the life of that stack would be exhausted?
Not necessarily. If all of the maintenance is continued and the inspections look good, it could potentially have longer life. We know of stacks that are still standing that have been there longer than 100 years. Some industrial cases.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. I want to move on to the next segment here, but before we do, I just want to, since so many people have streamed in, we now have over 200 people in the audience. I just want to highlight there are multiple ways for you to participate. I will be tracking on my additional unit here to see if any questions are coming in from the public via email. The only way I could figure out to do it at this time of night would be to have you send in an email to me directly. I don't see any as yet, but if you are watching on the TV, that's the way you can send in a question. You can also continue to send them in Zoom. I'm noticing that many of the comments that are coming in Zoom are actually points of view versus questions, but that's okay. I'll just sort through and find the questions that we need to direct to the experts, and you can provide those digital comments as you wish, and then we'll have some opportunity for public comment at the end on things that weren't addressed about the facts and figures that that you need to develop a point of view about the future. So now we're going to go to considerations for the future of the stacks. The options being to retain the stacks and to remove the stacks. So we always start with what the status quo is, and they're there. And to assist us with this, we're going to be going to two regulatory agencies that would have a significant role in that either of those options. One would be the Department of Toxic Substances Control, and the other is the California Coastal Commission. So I'm going to begin by going with the Department of Toxic Substances Control. And thank you, John Bystra, for joining us this evening and for your preparation this evening. As people may know in the community, the Department of Toxic Substances Control has prepared a status report, if you will, of the parcel. And John will be speaking about that and what he's learned through that and what the options are here going forward. John, if you would.
Thank you, Don. I want to thank on behalf of DTSC, just as the district did, that DTSC appreciates being able to provide some input here on, what our role not necessarily what our role is at the whole site, but what our role would be at the stacks. Now, to be straightforward, DTSC only normally becomes involved on property where there's hazardous waste or hazardous substances, are where they're known to be present or they're suspected to be present, due to whether it's someone in the community noticing or whether it's just because of historical actions that took place at the site. That's where our regulatory authority lies. If there's a clean piece of property, we have no authority, we are not involved. But stacks at Morro Bay, the first thing to know is that they haven't been investigated. I mean, the stacks are still there. If the stacks were pulled down, that would be a very different situation. But since they haven't been yet investigated, at least at this point in time, DTSC's position is as follows. If the stacks are just kept, whether it's for 1 year, 5 years, 50 years, the district is the lead agency for any activities that are associated with that, because continuing to maintain those stacks, unless some information comes to light, they will be in charge of that. Now, if the stacks are removed, I said Dynegy here on the slide, but we can easily say Vistra. Vistra would evaluate whether, and Diana Tickner already commented earlier, and thank you for that information, Diana, but that there's no known hazardous substances or materials in the stacks. So if there were no hazardous materials in the stacks when they started demolishing them, DTSC would actually not be involved at all because we wouldn't have any regulatory authority to do so. Now, this is just focused on the stacks. There are other areas at the Vistra-owned portion of the property that DTSC is involved in, but those are outside the scope of this meeting.
Okay, and when we had the preparation discussion for today's session, and I appreciate all of the presenters taking the time and effort to do a prep session so that we could really pin down many of these questions and get your insights and perspectives. John, you were referring to an additional report that you intend to be releasing later this month or early in October sometime. Could you describe what you're looking at there? And
I think the community will be interested. I'm happy to provide an overview or just a general snapshot of it. But the last year, statement of basis, which describes what the proposed remedy for certain portions of the facility, which don't include the stacks, but other portions of the facility will, be required. And that statement of basis was public notice last year. After it was public notice, we took in the public comments. Also, Vistra provided some additional information to DTSC about conditions at the site that was above and beyond what Vistra would need to do, since PG&E, as the historic property owner, also owned the environmental liability. But Vistra saw it in their interest to just get a better sense of what contamination still existed at these other areas of the site. And this, so taking all that information into consideration, DTSC is going to be revising the statement of basis, which will describe the new remedy. the new remedy proposed, and that will, the plan is that will, the public comment period for that will likely come out in the end of September, beginning of October. We need to do that in order to make sure that we don't infringe on people's holiday season. So, and during that, there will also be a public meeting. I don't want to go into the details of why the proposed remedy is being revised, but anyone who was involved in the previous public comment period and who received a responsiveness summary or that responded to all the comments gave some ideas on how the remedy could likely change based on additional documentation that Mr. provided. So, if people are interested in that, obviously, while they could comment during this presentation, I would ask that they send an email to me, and so we can get in touch and they can, ask me as many questions as they like about that. But I think that summarizes what the plan document at least is. So.
Okay. So bottom line is the Department of Toxic Substances Control tends to, whether there are hazardous substances on the site at various locations, and if such materials are identified, then you swing into action on what's done to deal with that.
Correct. I mean, if there are no hazardous substances or materials or wastes, we don't have any regulatory authority. So we don't tell someone to do something with their property when we have no right to be there. But when we do have a right to be there, then obviously we want to make sure whatever is done, that it's done in a way that's protective of human health and the environment, not just the long term or the short term, both. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that information. We might be coming back to you on a couple of those points. I want to turn now to Claudia Morro from Vistra. And Claudia, I think that John Bystra from DTSC has teed it up well here that it depends on the property owner, what the property owner wants to do. As the community looks at these choices about the stacks, retaining the stacks or removing the stacks, can you share some perspectives? Do you have any intentions if the stacks are removed about what would be done with the parcel where the stacks are? How are you thinking about this? How are you looking at this question?
Don, great question. So we have not looked at other possible uses for the site. With DTSC and PG&E, land use covenants on the property. It's got limited uses, but we're experts in generating power and building power plants. We're not experts on city planning. So we want to work with the city on any opportunities that come along and partner. It is that property or that part of the site, there's probably a lot of potential there. So we want to work with the city, if something arises in that regard.
Okay. So one of the other questions that's coming up here is if the city were to choose to retain the stacks, what would Vistra do in that case?
So in that case, we have never intended to keep them just because, as Diana mentioned, there's not any operational purpose for them. We recognize, they have a unique value to, some of the Morro Bay communities. So we agreed to give the city time to conduct, forums like this so we can share information and what we know about the stacks in that regard. But, we'll, if the city decides and notifies us that they would like the stacks to remain, then, then we'll work with the city in that regard.
Who would be then holding the liability for maintaining the stacks, for any of the things that Diana mentioned or that would be needed to sustain the the integrity and value of the stacks? Who would be responsible for those liabilities?
So if the city chose to keep the stacks up, then the city would be responsible for the maintenance, continued maintenance and liability associated with the stacks.
Okay.
As discussed, our intention would be to take them down just because they're not serving any purpose, but we'll work with the city in that regard.
And then if at some later time the stacks, fulfilled their life, or the city decided it wanted to do something else with that property, who would bear the responsibility for removing the stacks?
The city would bear the responsibility for removing the stacks at that point.
Okay. This might be a good time to pivot to Diana. Diana, I know when we were having the prep session, we were asking you the question about, what does Vistra envision the cost to be of removing the stacks at this point in time, based on your experience in working with and decommissioning other plants and your position as a professional engineer. Could you share what your estimate is of what that might be and some of the parameters that could move it up or down?
Sure. Well, these stacks need to be taken down by conventional methods, so they can't be imploded due to their location and proximity to the ocean, to the Embarcadero and everything else. So the only safe method to take them down will be a top-down deconstruction, and there's a couple of different ways that can be done. But it is more expensive than implosion. We haven't used this method in any of our other plants just due to the location. But it's going to be in the millions of dollars. I can't tell you exactly how much because I don't have any bids, but $2 million probably.
Okay.
Minimum. Everything's quite a bit more expensive in California than it is in other states that we work, just because of there's a lot more environmental scrutiny.
Okay. I think that covers the questions about the retention of the stacks and the removal of the stacks. I'm going to go on to the questions that are arising. Well, what would happen with the rest of the site? Or rather the site after the stacks are removed, if they are removed. And we come into play there with the Coastal Commission. And so I have a couple slides here from Kevin Kahn, who is the district supervisor for the Central Coast region of the California Coastal Commission. And he shared this information. As the public may know, the city of Morro Bay recently did a land use plan. It was approved unanimously by as I understand it, by the California Coastal Commission. And that plan is approved by the Coastal Commission, really provides for the following goals that you see there: to provide for walkable infill development, protect green belt and natural resources, and to address climate change and sea level rise. There's some three lenses through which the Coastal Commission would be looking at any future development or redevelopment of the stacks site. There was also another slide here from Kevin Kahn, is that typically when they look at...
Excuse me, Don, your slides are not up. Your PowerPoint is not up.
Oh, thank you. Has that been for a while? I didn't change anything here. Maybe something changed centrally. Is that working?
That's good.
Okay, let me just go back one if the public didn't see the prior one. So that was the slide that I was referencing about the three lenses through which the Coastal Commission would look at development here. And the Coastal Commission would be looking at these issues when it looks at what happens to the site in the future if it were to be redeveloped. And this is the process that they recommend being used for future development. And it's a process, and the bottom line of the process is shared by Kevin Kahn, in his written comments to the city manager and myself was that the Coastal Commission would be looking at this site, given its size and positioning, as one that would be favorable for mixed use. And that would be the approach that they would be looking at and working with what the various zonings are and constraints on the property, as referenced by Claudia Morro, on the covenants that were placed on the property by PG&E before it sold it. So a number of factors that come into play in looking at how this would go forward into the future. And another thing that I think would be helpful here, to go back to you for a moment, Claudia, is you said you didn't really have a particular idea about what might go there in the future. So tell us a little bit more about what your intention would be. Would it be to get a demolition permit for the turbine building and the stacks, unless the city asks for the stacks to be retained, and then sort of see what is present? Is that your perspective? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but just to clarify, what the point of view is here from Vistra.
Yeah, sure, Don. So I think, as noted by the mayor early in the meeting, we've executed an MOU. Our intention is to demo the power plant building and the stacks, if the city doesn't notify us to keep them up. So, so that is that's our stated intention. Again, we think the property has a lot of potential, and we want to work with the city in that regard. It may be that the opportunities come along, and some of these things are planned in parallel. So we'll partner with the city and work through that with the appropriate agencies, really to it'd be exciting, I think, to work through what some of those opportunities might be with that property, keeping the constraints in mind, as relates to the PG&E land use covenant. So, but no, our intention would be to demolish the power plant and the stacks, and then partner with the city on any opportunities to develop that site, according to the zoning restrictions, in line with the guardrails that are put in place by the PG&E covenants.
All right, thanks. I'm looking through some additional questions that have come in. Okay.
And Don, one thing, if you wouldn't mind me sharing that, if the city does decide, not to keep the stacks or not to notify us on that, I think there's some creative or neat opportunities, and would love for the community to participate in this and offer ideas. But some of the things we talked about is potentially a landmark monument, of the three stacks. There's been some ideas pitched already by the community, but we'd hope to work with the city on ways to memorialize or to remember this iconic landmark that is meaningful to lots of people in a creative way, if the city chooses to go that direction. So just planting a seed, for people's creative ideas.
Okay. So I'm hearing that you want to partner with the community. You're looking at potential mixed uses of these areas that you are demolishing, and that would be something that you would embark on with the community after the land was cleared. And I think I heard your CEO say in the community and Vistra had a chance to see what it looks like without everything that's already there. Okay.
You got it.
Okay. So I want to cover a couple other things. There have been creative ideas that have come in on a whole variety of things. Some people have suggested, wrapping the stacks. I'm going to turn to the city manager for these questions, because they're really sort of planning questions that would relate to what would be the considerations of the process the city would go through if some of these were pursued. So we heard comments from multiple people, some about wrapping the stacks, some about creating stacks of light, with LEDs and other things. Some people are having recreational ideas of keeping the stacks and bungee jumping or doing other kinds of climbing the stacks. Scott, as city manager, I know you've talked with your planning director about this. What would be some of the considerations and what would be the processes that would happen if the city were to retain the stacks and want to entertain those ideas?
Yeah, thank you. A lot of really brilliant ideas and really unique ideas have been coming forward, not just during the past 2 weeks, but I've heard them ever since I arrived 4 years ago here in Morro Bay. And, I think the first consideration, obviously, is would be a council discussion about whether or not we want to maintain them. Obviously, we heard from Senior Vice President of Vistra that the expectation would be the city would take over ownership and liability and maintenance costs for the stacks. So that's certainly a consideration. Now, that being said, art installation could be accomplished. According to our community development director, we would probably need to run through our planning commission. And I would suggest also working with some of our art groups like the Morro Bay Art Association to get some ideas and do calls for artists. So like I said, a lot of really cool ideas, but you sort of have to get through that issue of ownership and costs. We've heard about light installations, and they've occurred here in the past. I believe maybe on 4th of July and perhaps during the holiday seasons in the past. Both lighting with a star up above and then lighting from below. Looks like we lost the PowerPoint slide again, Don. So that would again probably follow.
We're asking to see your face.
Oh, great. Okay. Active light installation would probably follow a similar process for art installation where it would go through the planning commission. So that's just something we would want to look into, but it has been done in the past. Of course, that was done by the power plant owners and not the city. So just want to make sure that's clear. We've also had, ideas about utilizing that for rock, for climbing or for other thrill-seeking opportunities. According to our community development director, he thinks DTSC may have some restrictions or other agencies may have some restrictions from a safety point of view, utilizing these as recreational opportunities. Vistra may also have a perspective on that. So there's probably a lot more to weigh into on using it for active recreation. Those are just some of the ideas. Of course, I'm sure there's others popping up through the chat feature.
Okay. Then turning back to Diana, there's a question here about would it be possible to remove 2 of the stacks but leave one? And if you were to leave one, which one would you leave? From a structural point of view.
Yeah, of course. You could, they're all totally independent. They're not interconnected in any way. So yes, you could remove all but one. I'd probably select, one of the 3 or 4 stack just because they're newer and they don't have the brick liner. But which of the 3 or 4, it would kind of depend on what you were going to use the site for afterwards, sort of. So.
Okay. And some people were asking, if the stacks were taken down, in particular stack 1, 2, that's the one with the brick liner, and the bricks were salvageable. Could they be part of something that might be a fundraiser for the community or some other way to memorialize the stack that was there? Do you think there's anything retrievable out of what it would take to take down the stacks?
I'm not exactly sure, Don, on basically when those stacks are taken down from the top, it's essentially a concrete cutter that runs around the top. And so I'm not sure how that works with the brick lining, but there might be some way to salvage some of the ones at the bottom, maybe portion of the way up that could be reached by scaffolding or something like that. It wouldn't be something that we'd be opposed to if obviously it'd depend on the cost, but, it's definitely something that we could look into.
Okay. And to your point, Claudia, you were saying earlier, maybe something that could be done to memorialize the stacks or what was there previously, whatever. And there's a question from a photographer about the opportunity, if the stacks are to be removed, for photographers to enter the site and sort of document, the stacks before they're taken down, and maybe some steps in the process or something for the community to retain memory of this era.
I think that's something we could work with individuals on. Of course, safety is our number one priority. So, it would have to be done in an organized manner. But, that's something Diane and I could coordinate with the city on.
Okay. The other question that we have here is, and Scott, I think this is going to come back to you, and I think you gave your answer about what the community development director said probably answers it in part, but asking about whether the rubble could be used to build an artificial reef in Estero Bay. I'm sure that there are multiple agencies that would look at whether that could be permitted or not, but any further comment that you'd have on the resident that asked that question?
Well, as a surfer myself, that sounds really cool, but I don't know the myriad of agencies in addition to the Coastal Commission that would be involved. So obviously that requires a little more exploration.
Okay. I'm now going to step into a professionally dangerous area, but it's in response to multiple questions from the community. And the community has asked, well, can somebody please put together some rough cost estimates of these different options and when they would happen and what would occur? So stepping in where others fear to tread, I am offering this in response to those questions and have used the information that you've heard from the presenters. So I'm not presenting any new information, except there's one item here that I'll ask the city manager to clarify, which is something I got through the staff about insurance for the stacks and insurance for uses of the stacks if they were retained. But here's the information. So you heard from Diana Tickner, who's been tracking the stacks and working on this project since 2016. The cost of capping the stacks would be $275,000.
I think you want to share your screen again.
Oh yes, sorry.
That's okay.
This keeps shifting here. There we go. So. And Diana, just on that one, to cycle back, another question came in between times. And that is, if the stacks haven't needed to be capped thus far, why do they need to be capped now? And why would that be important to do if they were being retained without a operational purpose?
That recommendation is for longevity. So if the stacks were going to be kept for quite some time, you would want to do that. If we're going to demo them in the next 3 to 5 years, then we wouldn't incur that expense.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then the inspections numbers here are the ranges that you heard from Diana about the annual inspections, the class 1, the class 2, the ranges that they could go. And similarly, the maintenance numbers were for what current maintenance is. Of course, there's no assurance that current maintenance is what would be required in the future or would be sufficient in the future, but that's where that information came from. Scott, as city manager, can you just clarify? I know the city clerk contacted the city's insurance carrier and asked about insurance, and this is figure, I think, just as I heard it, just for the stacks themselves. How would the city look at insurance for uses of the stacks for any of the variety of purposes that people have been asking for using?
Yeah, good question. We think the kind of cap on the cost of just general liability insurance is about $10,000 per year for the 3 stacks together. Of course, if there was a cataclysmic event, depending on the severity of it, if the city had, taken ownership of these and liability of these, it could exceed the amount available in the risk pool and expose the city's general fund to massive liability, and it could have cataclysmic results for the city's operational ability. So that's obviously kind of worst case scenario. But on a general level, that's what we think is roughly about $10,000 a year for liability. Of course, if there were other uses, and again, it fell under the city's ownership, like recreational opportunities, I think that would change that number significantly.
Okay. And then the final number you see under retaining the stacks is using the number that heard last week from Diana Tickner about a range for what it would cost to remove the stacks. The city would need to have some reserves available for removal of the stacks when they would need to be removed. And Scott, as city manager, can you speak to if the community wanted the stacks retained, and if how would you approach this issue of funding for their future removal?
Well, I think you obviously have to create a fund to fund the ongoing maintenance costs as well. So we don't have that budgeted, so that would be a consideration. And then that removal of the stacks depends on how far out you're looking. As Diana mentioned, probably current year costs is in that $2 to $5 million range. But if we're talking 20 years from now, you have to factor in escalation costs. So it would be a pretty large number. It would have to be put away each year to sort of reach that level, and then maintain it with the cost increases over time. So it would likely come from the general fund.
Okay. And then for the removal of the stacks and the turbine building, and remediate the property to the extent required by DTSC and other government agencies, Scott, can you just speak to the MOU and what that provides in terms of what the cost to the city would be, and then how you would approach the redevelopment of the site?
Yeah, so the current MOU that the mayor mentioned earlier in the onset of this meeting is in place as of June this year, and basically gives Vistra till the end of 2027 to remove the turbine building, and if council doesn't exercise its option, we'll also tear down the stacks at their own expense, 100%. So there's no city cost involved whatsoever in that tear down under that arrangement. Of course, if we decide to exercise our option on the stacks, they wouldn't be part of the tear down, but then we would likely become responsible owners of those stacks. So as far as redevelopment of the site, that we know there's at least one project has been proposed for a battery storage facility on the portion of the site. And we did get a question about how does Vistra own all the property? They own the vast majority of the property out there, with the exception of PG&E, which owns the switchyard. Hopefully I got that right, Claudia.
You did. Good job.
Yeah, so that is, the redevelopment of the site is an open question beyond what we know we've received so far, which is a proposed battery project, which would go through the normal planning process review.
Okay, and then you see the note at the bottom of the slide here, the removal of the turbine buildings and stacks, unless the stacks are asked to be retained by the city, is to be completed by December 31st of 2027, or $3 million paid to the city. We had a question from the public about why 2027? Why couldn't it happen sooner if the city decides it wishes the turbine building and stacks to be removed?
It may be a good question for Vistra, but I think we've experienced, especially with some large projects in California, they do take time to go through the permitting process. But beyond that, I would leave that up to Claudia to respond to.
No, you're correct, Scott. So part of that time frame is just driven by the time it is required to go through that permitting process, and and also with the option for the city to notify us on the stacks, that option is held until December 31st of 2022. So, it's tough to start the process, without that decision being made. So that kind of weighs into it also.
And then there's a question here. Is there any other consequence other than the $3 million if Vistra doesn't complete the removal by December 31st of 2027? And Scott, and what other, ways would the city deal with that if that didn't happen, or what other ways do you have to address that?
Right. That's a good question. people have asked us about, is that the right number? And everything is obviously is subject to negotiation, and that's where we landed between the two parties. But of course, if Vistra does not tear down the facility by that time beyond the $3 million that will come to the city, no strings attached. There's also the missed opportunity for redevelopment, which either for Vistra to do or to sell to a potential developer in the future. So they potentially lose out on that revenue. So that it's more of a kind of a market nudge beyond the $3 million to the city.
And I guess in the background, one of the energizing or financing sources for this would be the battery storage project. And that's why this is tied into all that discussion. Okay, so let's go to a couple other things here. And actually, on that note about the battery storage project, it came to public notice about an event at the Monterey, the Moss Landing battery storage location, and I wanted to ask Vistra to make a comment about that.
Sure, Don, I can take that. So late Saturday evening, the Moss Landing Energy Storage Facility experienced an overheating issue with a few of our battery modules in the phase 1 300 megawatt system. So the safety systems worked as designed, and the overheating was controlled without outside assistance. But, as I mentioned before, safety is our number one priority. So we're taking a conservative approach, and we're keeping the facility offline. We have begun a preliminary assessment and hope to know more soon in that regard. Obviously we're really disappointed that this event occurred, because we want to be providing affordable, reliable, renewable energy to Californians, especially right now, when the weather is still pretty warm. But we're determined to find out what happened and why it happened, what's required to fix it, and learn from it to make these type of systems better. This technology is really critical for California. It's needed for the future, for the power grids here in California, and to transition away from fossil fuels. So, and battery storage in particular, is effective in grabbing that excess renewable energy from all the solar and wind across the state and storing that to be used, later during more and more hours of the day. So, we're disappointed by the event, but we're also really driven to make the needed changes and to bring the facility back online. And I just want to add in that regard that, we're still absolutely committed to the project here at Morro Bay. We're committed to battery storage. New technologies, which this is, have failed throughout history, but we're going to learn from this event, and we'll use those lessons here at Morro Bay and other sites. So this just only helps us learn more and get better.
Okay. And Scott, city manager, could you speak to how you're keeping on top of these developments, and the fire chief and others and how any public safety concerns about the battery storage project, that isn't our topic for tonight, but since the issue came up, how, when that project is considered, what the opportunities are, et cetera, for that to be vetted and questions answered and safety provisions provided, et cetera.
Yeah, it's a paramount concern for us in looking at this project. It's been submitted, and there's still back and forth between the community development department and Vistra associates. It has to go through your regular environmental review, which looks into this very issue. Our new fire chief is already learning as much as he can about this new technology, and obviously the event that occurred, the overheating event that occurred up north. He's already reached out to the colleagues up in Monterey Fire to understand, what he can learn from that, and what the fire marshal, Matt Vieira, can learn from that. So they're going to, look at that very closely. Obviously, when it gets to the planning commission, same thing. Beyond that, just all the other things that come with this, like view shed, noise, conformance with zoning, building codes, et cetera. All those good things will be fully vetted by our team, by the consultants that look at the environmental impacts, then the Planning Commission, City Council, and if it moves forward, most likely the Coastal Commission will weigh in. So there's a lot of layers of review. But for us, number one concern is public safety.
Okay. And just to try to speak to this question a little bit more, it's coming in a little different way. You spoke to it some before, but the person is asking if it costs more than $3 million to remove the stacks, why wouldn't Vistra and the turbine building, why wouldn't Vistra just pay the $3 million and leave the stacks? What's the position and the leverage that the city would have to ensure this outcome if the city wishes it to happen?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we've heard it time and time again that, Vistra, outside of the battery project, his interest is removing the facilities. It opens up the opportunity for a whole new vision for that area, which could include revenue generation for them or for somebody they would sell a portion of that property to. So again, as I mentioned before, there's a market component to this, that there probably is revenue to be generated amongst other uses that could provide community benefit to our community. So I would sort of look to Claudia to answer part of that, but my general feeling is that they're incentivized to tear that down so that there's a reuse potential.
No, you're right, Scott. There is value to that property above and beyond, the $3 million. So, that's our intention, to work with the city and coordinate with the city on opportunities for development. Because it's a beautiful city, it's a beautiful waterfront, and we do see opportunity there. So that's our intention, and the reasoning is, as you stated, a revenue opportunity for us, a revenue opportunity for the city and county and schools, et cetera. As more development occurs, that just generates more dollars for the community also.
So I'm seeing lots of other questions here really now morphing into the battery storage facility, and I know we got there because a question came up that was timely that needed to be addressed. But I would highlight that all of those would really be addressed in the extensive environmental impact statement process and everything else that would be involved. The Coastal Commission would be involved, a whole raft of agencies, including the ones that you've heard from this evening. So what I want to do now is two things. One, I'm going to check how many people feel that there are questions they would like to ask that have not been asked, and they'd like to ask them in person, and therefore you've raised your hand. And while I'm scanning that and multitasking here, let me just speak. People were asking, well, there's some examples from other places. So I looked at whatever examples I could find of where stacks like this were retained and where stacks like this were removed, to try to see what perspectives could be offered to the community. So one example, the one that from my assessment seemed the most relevant, was the Potrero Power Plant in San Francisco. They plan, this is what it looks like currently. They plan to retain the stack, and this is their artist's rendering of what that would look like. I would just say that, and I'll say this for the removal example as well, there's no apples to apples example here. The zoning and the heights in San Francisco at the waterfront, for this project, I think go as high as 20 stories. It's a very different kind of environment, but it is one that illustrates an example of applying, what you could do to retain a stack and have some use of it in an appropriate kind of redevelopment context. The other example here is about removal, and the closest example I could find on this is a 1970 stack down in Carlsbad for the Encina power plant, and that has the removal underway. You can see the process that's being used, just as Diana described it. They encase the area that's being removed They use the concrete cutters and all that's involved here. So Diana, would you actually speak to that a little bit? You know, people have concerns. We have concerns from folks on the Embarcadero, some of whom are, you know, buildings across the Embarcadero, businesses there 350 feet away. The stacks are 450 feet tall. You know, how are they going to be sure that there won't be disruption to their business and people getting to their business, or dust or other problems? And we'll have a quick entrance on this topic as well after you, Diana, from APCD about what they've learned from their colleagues down at San Diego APCD about how this is going and what, if any, emissions have been happening from it. So, Diana, could you offer some perspectives about what current thinking is of how you would remove this material? Where would it go? How would you get equipment in and out, that sort of thing?
Yeah, well, thanks, Don. Basically, this equipment would be built around scaffolding. You can see on the photo on the left-hand side that there's scaffolding going up the sides of the stack there. And then the work platform that is, you know, just below the top there, and the black material you can see there is screen netting. That's to protect the workers, but it also keeps dust from coming out. And there's generally water sprays on these concrete cutters to keep the dust down. The material exits through the bottom, so it goes inside and down the stack. So none of the material is coming out on the outside of the stack.
Okay, great. And APCD, what are you learning about from your colleagues about how this is going and how that is working out?
Hi, Don. Thanks. Yeah, this is Tim again. I did briefly talk with my colleagues in San Diego County APCD, and you're correct. Yeah, the job sounded like it was about midway through, and they haven't had any violations or compliance issues. They haven't received any citizen dust complaints or any complaints of that nature. And in fact, the supervisor that I talked to said the job is going very well on their perspective.
Okay. And Diana, just to come back to you here, I may have missed it because I'm multitasking with people's questions coming in. But how would the trucks move in and out? What's your access point for that? People are worried about disruption and such.
Yeah, as much as possible, we would try to use the Main Street entrance that comes in the backside of the plant so that the truck traffic would not have to go down the Embarcadero.
Okay, and is that the access point that's currently being used in conjunction with the water reclamation facility, heavy vehicles using that?
Yeah, that's correct. The city's water reclamation facility project, the sewer line project, are using that entrance. They have a large amount of material stored on our site, and then they also have soil and waste materials stored as well. And those trucks come in and out that entrance.
So your plan would be that you would use that Main Street and not go down Quintana, but you go directly onto that on-ramp to one, if that was the appropriate direction, to avoid any other disruption of the local community?
Correct.
Okay. I know that's what you'd said before. I just want to be sure that people had the opportunity to hear it directly from you. And then some people were saying, well, what would this all look like if the stacks were gone? And in fact, we got comments submitted from somebody who said, well, there's a local business that has a photo on its wall where the stacks have been airbrushed out. Why don't you go take a picture of it? And so I did, and I'm offering that for your consideration. So now we're going to go to public comment. I see 8 hands raised, and we have a few final things to be covering here. So I'm going to ask Dana if you can help us with that. And Dana, do we need to elevate you to being a co-host, probably. AGP, can you handle that, or do you need me to do that?
Would you like us to handle the public comment?
Yes, and also elevate Dana, because she will be tracking it as well.
All right, I will do that. Just a minute.
Dana Swanson is a city clerk. So we'll take some public comments, ask you to please focus the comments on questions or information that you can provide. Opinions and points of view, certainly appreciate those, but there will be hearings before the council for you to offer your own judgments. I just mentioned that just so you don't feel like you have to get everything out tonight or you won't have another opportunity. So AGP, why don't you go ahead? I think you have Linda Winters is the first. Is that right? No, Mark is the first on the list. Is that the order that they came in? AGP?
The first person with their hand raised is Mark, and we will allow you to talk. And Mark, you are on the line. You need to unmute yourself, and you're allowed to speak.
So if you're making a public comment, not only does AGP need to unmute you, but you need to unmute yourself as well. Go to prayer so that you can speak. Maybe we can come back to Mark. Should we go to Larry Truesdale?
Okay.
I think the next up on the list.
And Larry, you've been allowed to speak. You can unmute yourself.
All right. It's actually Carol Truesdale, the better half of the Truesdale family.
That's debatable.
With Vista coming in with the stacks and everything else like that, how much of an impact is it going to be to the residents that are already having issues with the WRF project?
Okay, Diana, would you like to take a quick summary comment about that in terms of what do you see as the potential impacts and how you'd be mitigating them with the demolition of the stacks?
I'm not exactly sure her question. Were you concerned that there was going to be overlap between the city's project and the demolition at the same time?
You'll have the WRF done before this. Am I still on?
Yeah.
Yes, you are.
Okay. My concern is that we've had an impact to the residents here with the WRF project, and it's been very difficult for a lot of the people to get around town. Now, with the large removal and Vistra energy, and then putting the demolition of the properties and taking away the debris, how much of an impact is that going to have on the residents throughout the demolition process?
Well, since the majority of the material will go out the back gate and onto Main Street and right onto Highway 1,
Yes, I don't.
it won't be driving. There won't be trucks driving through neighborhoods or on the Embarcadero. It'll be fairly minimal impact. I mean,
Well,
we haven't done a traffic study or anything yet, but
It goes up to Route 1. Main Street is a main thoroughfare for a lot of North Morro Bay people to come into town. And if you're utilizing that infrastructure to get on 1, are you heading north or south with the debris?
on Highway 1,
Yes.
I'm not sure which landfills will be able to take what materials.
Wouldn't that be up in the Paso Robles area or up in the King City area that you'd have to get up to go to get to Highway 101, which then would impact Highway 41?
Well, more than likely, the steel materials will probably go to the Port of LA, would be my guess. That's where it went when we took the pipeline out. But I mean, we haven't explored all of the options about what materials moving where. As part of the permitting process, we'll have to do a detailed traffic plan that will, evaluate all the impacts to all the streets that we use.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, we're only probably talking about, 10 10 trucks a day tops.
For how long?
It'll probably take about 2 years.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Okay, and I think we have Jill Holstad coming up next. Holstad? Jill, can you unmute yourself? I'm not hearing you. I think this is a phone call-in listener. AGP, can you tell the phone call-in listener what they need to do to sort of be heard when they call in by phone?
No, we see him here in the non-phone listener. They just appear to be muted.
Oh, okay.
We have asked them to unmute.
Okay. Well, I guess we best move on. So the next one that we haven't tried yet is Nelson West 1 at Gmail. The Nelson family.
All right, they've been allowed to talk and prompted to unmute.
AGP, do you understand why we might be, so many people might be having problems getting through?
Some of them might have left. Everything looks fine on our end.
Okay, then we'll move forward. I guess Shirley is our next one. Shirley?
Yes, thank you. Are you able to hear me?
Yes. Welcome.
Great. Awesome. Thank you so much. I think you were kind of trying to address my question in the chat, but more specifically just about the land disruption. I am an extremely close resident to the plant, and there are a number of us that are extremely close residents with nice homes, and we've lived here for a very long time. I'm more concerned about studies that perhaps have been done with the actual erosion or disruption, if you will, to the land just from the deconstruction. All of that process with all the weight coming down of the stacks, I'm very grateful to hear that it would not be an implosion situation, again, due to our close proximity. But as far as any studies being done for that, I'm going to address the studies with the battery facility, storage facility being so close again to the residential situation, open land, fire constraints, all of that worry. I'm really concerned more about approximately a 2-year process to bring these down and what that might do just, I don't know whether it's vibration, if you will, or anything as far as a lot of us that are up on top of the bluffs, again, with very close proximity and very sandy loam type of soil, since we are very close to the waterfront. If Diana or someone could address that, it'd be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Well, the Coastal Commission, in order to issue a permit for the demolition process, will look at, have us perform studies on all kinds of things from, cultural resources to noise, dust. But the plan would not generally be to remove the pavement that's in place. It would be left in place through the duration to minimize the dust. There's generally water cannons operating to keep dust down. So there's lots of safeguards for control. I also think the city of Morro Bay, from a noise perspective, has limited operating hours that construction can be done. So there are safeguards around, disturbance during daylight hours and things like that as well. So, we haven't started the permitting process yet, so I don't have the entire list of everything that's going to be required. But based on our permitting for the pipeline removal back in 2018, that list of studies and investigations is quite substantial.
Okay. Thank Thank you. And AGP, we're still getting things in the chat and from other folks saying they're having difficulty. Could you describe again when somebody, you've authorized somebody to, because it's their turn in the queue, to make a public comment, what they need to do on their end and how?
You just need to unmute it on your screen.
On the callers, on the viewer's screen, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll go to, we'll try that with Sharon Sheltzer, who's the next one up. If you could unmute her.
All right, she has been prompted to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So the answer to that question is when I was unmuted by the host, a little screen popped up that asked me to unmute it. We don't have the normal unmute on our end that you see during Zoom time. Anyway, but you did offer that opportunity by whatever you did on your end. I was just wondering, I'm somewhat of a latecomer to this discussion, but I can see a win-win situation for all parties involved. And although it sounds to me like maybe it's almost a done deal that the stacks are coming down, imagine if the stacks stayed there. Vistra set aside $3 million or something for the demolition. What if they were to provide that money and the liability goes off of their backs for the stacks? They become owned by the city, and the city can put that money into a fund that would be invested to keep up with the market for future removal, however many years in the future that might be. And the stacks could stay, saving so much money for their demolition and be utilized in some fashion or another, even with the development that might be put in the place of the building that would come down. They, just like the picture that Don showed of the development being incorporated with the stack, it would be a very unique area. And in addition to it being incorporated into the development, all people's ideas about being used as an art canvas, as a light canvas, and even climbing, if that didn't cost too much money in insurance, could be incorporated into the stacks. So okay. I'd like to, I just wonder, is there a reason why that wouldn't be a win-win for everybody?
Okay, I think this is actually getting into a proposal, which might be better presented before the council when it's deliberating on the choices here between keeping the stacks and not. We were trying to have the public comment really focus on technical questions that are the experts that we've assembled here this evening could answer. So if I could ask the remaining people, if they've got questions that to focus on technical issues. Some people are tiring of the program. Sorry, this will be digitally recorded. It is being digitally recorded. It'll be available on the city's website if you cannot stay longer. We were trying to keep it as concise as we can, but we also want to acknowledge public comment requests. So let's take a look and move on. Who's next in your queue, AGP? And please.
Next up here, we have Mark. Mark, you have been prompted to unmute. Yeah, I did.
I think that wasn't successful before. Can you go to your next one? And
yes.
It seems like it's not working.
Okay. If people are having trouble finding their microphone icon, it's at the bottom left-hand side of their screen. There's a little microphone, and if it has a red line through it, it's muted. If you click on it, it will be unmuted. Okay, and we will continue to ask from our side for them to unmute it, which will pop up a screen that will ask them to unmute. Okay, go ahead.
And maybe maybe that'll be easier for people to share if we take it off share screen here. It might show up more readily where people are accustomed to seeing it versus where it typically is, or where it's showing up this evening for them. So can we move please to the next, AGP, if you can move us along. We've got a few more people, and we do want to, Councilmember Addis is going to be closing us here in a moment, and we want to have a complete session.
Yeah, up next we have Linda Winters. Linda, you've been prompted to unmute.
Let's move on to the next, please. AGP.
Next up, we have Matt Zarega. Matt, you have been prompted to unmute.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate it. I do have a comment, a couple of questions. Comment is, I like the stacks personally, but that I don't think that's super important. What's important, I think, is that the city does what's in its financial best interests. And in interest of that objective, the question I have is, does the city and or Vistra have an actual quote for removal, or are we just estimating? And then I have another question after that, and that is, last year I remember seeing some antennas installed at the top of the middle tower from some technicians hanging from helicopters. It was pretty impressive to watch. But is there any residual financial obligation associated with those? And if so, who is obligated to make that whole?
Don, you want me to take that?
Yes, please.
Let's start with on the question of the quote. Those are just estimates from information that we've gotten from people that have done other similar projects of demolition of stacks. So we haven't actually gone out to bid the job yet at this point. As for what you saw, that equipment's owned by PGE. I think we covered this earlier. You may not have been on. It connects their switch yard on the site to Diablo Canyon, and if the stacks do come down, that communication equipment has to be moved. If that number 3 stack does remain, then PGE's equipment would remain on it.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to the next person in the queue.
All right, up next we have nelsonswest1@gmail.com.
Hi, this is David Nelson. And, I've been watching this, and the whole meeting seems to be premised on that there is no pollution in these stacks. Now, I was there 20 years ago when the CEC accepted Duke's word that the cement in those stacks could not be recycled because of the intense pollution that's inside of them. And it was found then that the stacks would have to be removed. We're being told now that it's going to be costing $2 to $5 million. Duke was, and you can look all this stuff up. It's in Cal Poly library. And these are facts that the CEC accepted as facts. And those stacks are one of the most polluted areas in our county, period. I came to the city council and the air pollution district years ago when they took all the steel off of that number 1 stack. And they were going to test what was inside. Now we're being told that there's no tests have done inside, and the pollution, the state pollution control guy talks like there's no pollution in it. Well, it's true that they didn't look at them, but the point is they were found to be totally polluted. People need to know that, because I love the stacks. I think the stacks are an engineering feat. You know, the people that worked on them were real craftsmen, but they're polluted. They're toxic. And they were fined in 2001 for shooting asbestos out the top. For 60 years, they ran bunker oil that wasn't fit to burn. And so that's what we have on the inside of those stacks, and to believe anything else is misinformation. And these facts have been on the table. It's obvious the city and the city managers and stuff haven't looked back into the Duke record because they never went forward. And so to me, I know in my heart that that's the most polluted site in this county. And our city is getting the shaft from all these agencies that are supposed to be watching out for us. Now, to say that those stacks...
David, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I think if we're going to have this be a question, we should turn to John Bystra. Yes, so he has an opportunity to respond. Pardon me?
Why are we told that they're not polluted?
Well, I'm going to turn to the agency in charge, who will be monitoring with the hazardous material as it comes off the stacks, if the stacks are removed, and have him reiterate what would be done if anything is found to be hazardous. So John, can we turn to you, please?
You know that it is. Why don't you know that they're already polluted? I don't understand that.
Well, I can answer that question. And the thing I would say, Mr. Nelson, is that I'm not negating any information you've had in the past. I don't have that information. All I know is that the actual condition of the stacks themselves right now, the stacks aren't broken. They're still complete. If they were broken down, part of what Dynegy's responsibility would be...
Vistra.
Yes, thank you. Vistra's responsibility would be to characterize whether the stacks have hazardous materials or not. Now, you're telling me they do. And if there's past information, obviously that might be something that has to be considered. However, there would have to be data that shows those stacks have hazardous materials in them, or they have hazardous materials at levels that actually make them hazardous, not some trace amount. And if that was the case, DTSC will become involved. But until those stacks are destroyed and the materials investigated, I'm not assuming that they're contaminated or not. I'm just waiting for the data telling me that.
Hi, this is...
Okay. I'm getting requests from the city manager and from council members that we honor the time frame for this session and we bring this to a close. And they're asking and welcoming and encouraging anyone who has additional questions or comments to send them in. You can send them to the council at morrobayca.gov down here at the bottom, or if you have things that you want to raise with the individual agencies, you can see them listed here. So we don't want to cut off public discussion about this, but we do want to honor the time here. And I know that Councilmember Addis, you wanted to comment about what's next steps from here and to close the session.
Thank you so much, Dawn. And I definitely want to say a whole host of thank yous to folks that helped tonight. So first and foremost to you, to our city manager, to numerous staff that I saw here, to my council colleagues, to the advisory board members. We had numerous advisory board members that I saw as participants, as well as our chamber members and chamber CEO. We had a representative from Senator Laird's office, Coastal Commissioner Harmon, San Luis Coastal School Board Trustee Doppler Drew, and then of course to Vistra, to APCD, to DTSC, the Coastal Commission, but most importantly to each of you that came tonight. We heard from dozens of you before this meeting, over 190 people logged on, and what's impressive to me is that the focus of all these feedback and questions has really centered wholly on both the people and the place and the well-being of Morro Bay. And I think it's a testament to our engaged electorate. So I definitely want to say thank you to each of you for that. And to just focus on this point that we're all invested in the past, the present, and most excitingly, the future of Morro Bay. We all have thoughts and opinions about the stacks, and now we have something that has become incredibly rare these days, which is the facts. And so as we create Morro Bay's future, future, I want to invite you to keep close what you heard tonight, to rest on informed opinions. And I'm not going to speak for my council colleagues, but I think they will agree that we're going to do the same. So next steps, we're going to be reviewing the data, which includes the feedback from this forum, and then deciding how to move forward, whether that's getting more input, holding more forums, or moving to a decision. So we'll be taking everything into consideration before we take the next step. And you can be our partners in that. So you can go to the Morro Bay website, you can share this presentation with your friends, you can sign up for the Notify Me on the Morro Bay website, which is morro-bay.ca.us, and you can continue working with us across the process. This is truly a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make this kind of decision for Morro Bay. So I want to thank each of you for being here and wish you a wonderful evening.
Thank you very much, everyone, for attending and for your participation. I want to thank the agency presenters for all the work you did on your own in the practice sessions with the city manager and myself, and in your service to our community. More will be discussed if these sites are demolished. There's an extensive public participation process for the demolition permit. And so if your comments and questions and concerns didn't get answered, there are other forums. This is really to help the council decide from a policy point of view which direction it would like to go. With that, Scott Collins, any final comment you'd like to make?
No, just to thank you, and we will be posting the presentation on the city's website under Hot Topics, and then once the video has been turned into something we can share on YouTube, then we'll put the link on that same news post on the city.
And the slides from this evening's
it's already on the website.
Are already there. We just have a big caveat. As you heard, there were many nuances and contextual explanations given to the slides that you or anyone else that uses the slides should certainly have in mind, and we put that advice with the position of the slides on the city's website. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for being a great community. Thank you, participants and presenters, for all the work you did, and have a great evening.
Thank you.